The minivan rumbles slowly down the dirt road, stretching away in front of it. I roll the window beside me up and down, fighting back sleep as countless fields of corn rush past it. My brother plinks away at his Game Boy, happy little electronic beeps and chirps filling the trip with noise other than the dirt bumping beneath the wheels. My great-grandpa snores from the front seat, as he tends to do. He's a large man, solemn but cheerful, who spent a good fourth of his day grinning with one corner of his lips and chuckling rather than speaking. Despite that, he never manages to stay awake during long car rides with family. My parents in the middle row are nearly following suit, talking quietly and resigning themselves to the unchanging scenery outside our windows. My great-grandma looks at us all in the rearview mirror and speaks up for the first time in a while. Her nose scrunches slightly as she begins speaking, and she says, "You boys want something to mull over back there? Both look like you're going to keel over soon." Her voice is as sharp as a tack, just like her personality, and straight to the point. My brother and I look up, curious, if not entirely interested. "Your mama ever tell you me and Grandpa used to be in a motorcycle gang?" I swear I heard my jaw hit the floor. Yeah, this may not sound incredibly interesting. There are countless people who make up various motorcycle gangs across everywhere. Countless more enjoy riding them, so what's the big deal? Up until that point in my life, I had never heard my grandparents curse, never heard them shout, hardly ever even raised their voices to scold my cousins or me. To think they had been in one of these oft-reported criminal groups of angry men with bad tempers shocked me. Grandparents and great-grandparents, even more so, are supposed to be loving, if a little grumpy. Pleasant to be around, if a little bit boring. They've got stories enough to put you to sleep without even trying. This story, though, was something many young children may never have dealt with before. In the eyes of my youth, that was as close as she could have been to saying she used to rob banks. If I'm being honest, even at 8, I still thought biker gangs did rob banks. In her light-hearted attempt to wake my brother and I up, she made that solitary trip stick with me longer than any other. Children have very vivid imaginations, and on top of that, a very specific view of the world. Their sense of the world is small, and most things are very black and white. Great-grandparents that have been strictly religious as long as you can remember are definitely good. Brownies and cookies are great. Biker gangs, always portrayed as rough and angry and usually drunk, are a bad thing. Through the eyes of a child, these things are simple, but in truth, they hardly ever are. Everyone has a story. Every life is invariably different than the next. This one little tidbit of innocent information was one of the first times the idea of a gray area in life occurred to me. As young as a person may be when this occurs to them, it may take some time to process it. It certainly did for me. The rest of that trip was a very, very important learning experience. I spent a lot of time in the garage with my dad and great-grandpa talking about motorcycles. One thing I had never noticed until I had spent a dreadfully hot afternoon in that grease-stained and humid garage was that my great-granddad smiled with his whole face while he was working on cars and motorcycles. Another was that he talked more than I had ever heard in my whole life when him and my dad started talking about motorcycles. As much a symbol of rebellion as it ever has been, the wall of motorcycles sitting in my great-grandfather's garage was probably one of his crowning achievements, something I had shied away from countless times before. Hear them talk the way they did, giddy with excitement as they rattle off design specifications as fast as its own motor revs down the pavement, would have made anyone question how bad it really could be. Hacks, bobbers, dives, 100 more lingo terms most people would hardly understand. Here sit these two lifelong mechanics, having a field day just looking at the thing, let alone riding it. Everything carries a stigma with it, good or bad. Plenty of times, though, that stigma turns out to be hardly applicable. If nothing else, I understood why my grandparents had decided to make this such a large part of their lives, but I just still didn't understand how they came to be the sweet old people I had always known and loved. Their personalities seemed so permanent to me back then. Later along during this trip, my grandmother was out in her garden. Sprawling a good 20 feet from the back of her house, it was a veritable jungle from the eyes of a child. Her head bobbed up and down as she bent beneath the rows of ripe red strawberries and tantalizing rhubarb. Tomatoes crept up stabilizing rods of metal, and off along the edges watermelons slowly grew and grew. This was my favorite place of their house, and I spent a long time chasing bugs and lizards and who knows what else out there. After everything that had been said that day, though, most anyone would have found it surreal. My grandmother sat me down after a while and talked to me about the garden, how it grows and changes, and from there, back to the motorcycles. I remember the noise, the bike going vroom underneath us, but the wind was what made it special. I remember hearing her laugh about that. A reminiscent, longing laugh if I had ever heard one. I piped up from my spot among the tomatoes and rhubarb and asked her, "If you liked it so much, Grandma, why'd you stop?" She went quiet for a minute and picked weeds as she thought about it. When she finally spoke up again, the laugh was a distant thought in my mind. "Because it almost killed me, Gary and I." A few of our old friends had died going around this ugly little bend in the road a few years back, and we crashed in the same place. It was a sign if I had ever seen one. Straight to the point, as always. I took that story to heart for a very long time. On the trip home, she talked more about how it opened their eyes to what they were really doing. And for my great-grandpa's quiet seat in the front, he elaborated, "What would we be leaving behind if we got hurt again? You don't think things through when you're on a bike. Your mind is going as fast as the road underneath you." They had turned away from something dangerous to them for their family, even though they had enjoyed it immensely. I was glad to know I was meant as much to them as I did, but it also got me to think. People have things that are important to them, things they would change their entire lifestyle to keep. And then it hit me. That gray area had finally resolved itself into something understandable. Just because they had lived their lives in such a frowned-upon way, they changed who they were for themselves and their family. Not every person will live the same life, and not everyone will change. Even if they do, they may not be for remotely the same reasons. That being said, though, a person's past may make up their story, but it isn't a page-by-page retelling. My great-grandparents greatly enjoy riding motorcycles, to this day. They were at one point in a motorcycle gang, but that doesn't make them outlaws or criminals. More often than not, a person's past does not define who they are. People are who they choose to make themselves.